The rain poured down relentlessly on the empty highway near Birmingham, Alabama, as if the sky was releasing all its sorrow onto the earth. Heavy raindrops pounded against the windshield, forming winding streams that reflected the dim amber glow of the streetlights in the dark night. Puddles on the asphalt shimmered like shattered mirrors, sending up small waves each time the tires rolled through, only to fade back into the darkness. No other cars were in sight, only the sound of rain, the wind whistling through the window cracks, and the steady hum of an old navy blue SUV moving slowly through the storm. Inside the vehicle, a soft jazz tune played from the car's worn-out radio, the smooth saxophone notes offering quiet comfort against the loneliness of the night. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Johnson gripped the steering wheel firmly, her tired eyes scanning the road ahead. At 38, she was a strong woman with a tall, lean frame, her dark brown hair pulled back into a low bun. She wasn't in uniform tonight, just a simple black sweater hugging her form and a pair of well-worn jeans. Frayed at the knees, after a long day at the naval base in Mobile, where she had just finished an intense training session for new recruits. All she wanted was to get home. She had been driving for over 2 hours, and the endless downpour only added to the weight pressing down on her shoulders. But the jazz, a classic Miles Davis tune her father used to love, brought her a fleeting moment of peace. A quiet link to a time when life had felt simpler. Sarah pressed her lips together, her fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel in rhythm with the music. In her mind, images of her family emerged, clearer than the faint streetlights flickering outside. She thought of her mother, Evelyn, who always welcomed her with a pot of hot tea whenever she visited. She thought of her younger brother, Daniel, a driven young engineer working in Atlanta, whom she hadn't seen since last Christmas. And she thought of her little niece, Lily, the bright-eyed 5-year-old who always called her superhero Aunt Sarah whenever she told stories about life aboard a Navy ship. A small smile crossed Sarah's lips, but it quickly faded as the rain outside seemed to intensify, as if trying to wash away even those warm memories. She had spent over 15 years in the U.S. Navy, climbing from an ordinary sailor to the rank of lieutenant commander, a grueling journey that few could truly understand. As a black woman in the military, Sarah had faced her share of prejudice and obstacles, but she had always held her head high, proving her worth through every mission. She had commanded a patrol fleet in the Gulf of Mexico, led rescue operations in storms far worse than this one. Yet now, on this desolate highway, she didn't feel like a battle-hardened officer. She was just Sarah Johnson, a tired woman yearning to get home, take a hot shower, and sleep. The rain showed no sign of letting up. Sarah turned the wipers to their highest setting, but the road ahead remained a blur. She muttered under her breath, "Just 30 more miles. Sarah, you got this." Her own voice echoed in the confined space of the car, blending with the low hum of the saxophone. She adjusted her posture, forcing herself to focus on the road ahead, but a faint sense of unease had begun to settle in her chest. Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was the eerie emptiness of the road, or maybe it was something else, something deeper. The instincts of a soldier, sharpened over years of service, whispering a warning she couldn't quite decipher yet. Sarah glanced at the dashboard clock, 10:47 p.m. She should have been home by now, but the relentless rain had slowed her down significantly. With a sigh, she let her right hand slip from the wheel for a moment, massaging her temple. "Just need to get home," she murmured to herself. "I'll call Mom, tell her about my day, and promise to visit this weekend." The thought brought her a small sense of comfort. She hummed softly along with the jazz tune playing on the radio, letting it ease the tension that had been building up. But then, cutting through the rhythm of the rain and music, another light appeared in her rearview mirror, flashing red and blue. Sharp and cold, slicing through the fragile peace inside her car. Sarah frowned, her pulse quickening. She eased off the gas and checked the mirror again. A police cruiser was following her, its emergency lights flickering but silent, like a ghost moving through the storm. "What the hell?" she muttered, a creeping unease settling in. She carefully pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the music, and took a deep breath. She hadn't done anything wrong, she was sure of that. She had been driving at about 50 miles per hour, well below the limit due to the weather. Her paperwork was in order, her insurance valid, but as the patrol car's headlights flooded through her windshield, she couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. The officer's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out, the rain glistening on his jacket under the flashing lights. He moved toward her window with slow, deliberate steps, each one radiating authority. Sarah rolled her window down just enough to speak, keeping a safe distance. The cold wind and raindrops rushed in, sending a chill down her spine. The officer, a white man with sharp features and an unreadable expression, leaned down, locking eyes with her. His voice was rough, with no hint of politeness. License and registration. Sarah clenched her jaw, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Good evening, officer," she said. "May I ask why you're pulling me over?" But the question only seemed to harden his gaze. His smirk widened, and his voice rose a notch. "I asked for your papers, not your questions. Hand them over, now." Sarah took a deep breath, her fingers moving slowly to open the glove compartment. She could feel trouble brewing. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop. Not here, in the middle of a desolate highway. In the pouring rain, she was about to face something far beyond what she had prepared for. The rain kept pounding against the windshield, relentless, as if trying to shatter the thin glass protecting her from the storm outside. Inside the car, Sarah gripped her documents tightly, her breathing steady but slow. Outside, the officer barked again, louder this time. "License and registration. Don't make me ask again." His tone was harsh, impatient, as if she were some kind of criminal caught in the act, not just a lone driver on a rainy night. Sarah took another deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Years in the Navy had trained her to withstand pressure, to keep a steady mind in the face of aggression. She carefully passed her documents through the narrow opening in the window. Her eyes locked on the officer through the blur of rain. The name on his badge gleamed under the flashing lights, Michael Davis. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and narrow, scrutinizing eyes, he snatched the papers from her hand without so much as a nod. "Sarah Johnson," he read aloud, his voice carrying the weight of suspicion. "Lieutenant Commander in the Navy." "Huh?" His lips curled into a sneer. "What, rushing back to base to show off your little medals?" The contempt in his tone was unmistakable. Sarah clenched her jaw but kept her voice level. "I'm just on my way home. Officer, may I ask why you pulled me over?" Davis lifted his gaze, narrowing his eyes like a predator sizing up its prey. "You want to know why?" His smirk widened, oozing arrogance. "Your left tail light's out. Didn't notice?" Sarah frowned, glancing at her side mirror. Through the thick curtain of rain, she couldn't see clearly, but she knew her car had just been serviced last week. "I wasn't aware of that," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "Can I check it now?" That question seemed to ignite something in Davis. He slammed his palm against her car door, making Sarah flinch. "You questioning me?" he barked, his voice slicing through the rain like a whip. "Who the hell do you think you are? Talking back to me?" Sarah's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her face neutral. She knew her rights. She wasn't obligated to answer unnecessary questions. And a broken taillight wasn't reason enough for this kind of hostility. But she also understood the reality of the situation. A black woman, alone on a deserted highway at night, facing an officer who was clearly looking for a fight. "I'm not arguing," she said evenly. "I just want to understand the situation." Davis had no interest in her composure. He took a step back, his hand resting on the gun at his hip, eyes burning with aggression. "Step out of the car," he ordered, his voice cold, allowing no room for defiance. Sarah hesitated. She knew she had the right to refuse unless there was a valid legal reason. But the menace in Davis's eyes, the way his fingers hovered over his weapon, sent an icy ripple down her spine. "Why do I need to get out?" she asked, her tone now carrying a hint of steel. "Over a taillight?" Davis sneered again, his smile now more of a threat than an expression. "Because I said so," he snapped. pounding on the door again. Out, now, or I'll drag you out myself. Sarah tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her mind racing. She didn't want to escalate the situation, but she also refused to bow to blatant abuse of power. Finally, she exhaled, unclasped her seatbelt, and pushed the door open. Stepping out into the rain, the icy rain soaked through Sarah's sweater instantly. Her neatly tied hair was already dripping wet, but she stood tall, her gaze locked onto Davis. "All right," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'm out, now what?" Davis didn't answer right away. He looked her up and down, his stare heavy with prejudice. Then, without warning, he grabbed her wrist, spun her around, and shoved her against the car. "You're under arrest for obstructing an officer," he declared, triumphant. Before Sarah could react, he yanked a pair of handcuffs from his belt and snapped them tight around her wrists. The metal bit into her skin, the pressure sharp enough to make her wince. But she gritted her teeth, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her pain. "You have no right to do this," Sarah said, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with fury. "I did nothing wrong," Davis scoffed, dragging her toward his patrol car. "You think you're smart, huh? The military won't save you. Lieutenant Commander, out here, I am the law." He shoved her into the backseat and slammed the door shut. The lock clicked, a final, damning sound. Sarah sat still, rainwater streaming down her face, wrists aching from the cuffs. But she felt no fear, only a burning rage. Through the rain-blurred window, she watched Davis stride toward her car, give it a cursory glance, then return to his own vehicle, that smug grin still plastered across his face. The patrol car's engine rumbled to life. Red and blue lights flashed through the storm as Sarah was driven away from the empty highway she had once hoped would lead her home. She remained silent, breathing steadily, her eyes burning with quiet resolve. She thought of the dangers she had faced at sea, the battles she had fought to prove herself in the Navy. "I won't let him win," she told herself, the words in her mind steady as crashing waves in a storm. Davis might think he had her under control, but Sarah Johnson was not someone who bowed easily. And she knew, somehow, some way, this injustice would not last forever. As the patrol car sped through the night, the rain continued to fall, but inside Sarah, a fire had been lit, a fire of defiance, of hope, and of a vow that she would reclaim justice, no matter the cost. The patrol car pulled into the county police station parking lot, red and blue lights flickering against the rain-slick pavement. Sarah Johnson sat in the backseat, her hands still tightly cuffed, her black sweater and jeans soaked through, sending chills deep into her bones. But no cold could compare to the smoldering anger within her. Michael Davis, the officer who had unjustly arrested her on that desolate highway, yanked open the car door and hauled her out with a rough grip. "Move," he ordered, his tone clipped and laced with false authority, as if she were some dangerous criminal rather than a Navy lieutenant commander detained over a broken taillight. Sarah gritted her teeth, following Davis through the station's main entrance, her soaked shoes leaving faint water trails on the grimy tile floor. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sweat, disinfectant, and dampness from the lingering storm outside. Flickering fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow over peeling walls and faded crime prevention posters. Long past their prime, Davis shoved her toward the intake desk, where a weary-looking middle-aged woman sat typing. "Process her," he ordered, more command than request, tossing Sarah's documents onto the desk as if they were garbage. Sarah stood tall, her cuffed wrists aching from Davis's unnecessarily tight grip, but her head remained high, her eyes unwavering. The intake officer glanced at her, then at the documents, her brow furrowing slightly as she read the words, "Lieutenant Commander. United States Navy. You're military?" the woman asked, her voice low but tinged with curiosity. Before Sarah could respond, Davis cut in, his tone dripping with mockery. "Oh yeah, she's military, but here, she's just another obstructionist. Mugshot, fingerprints, then lock her up." Sarah turned to face him, her eyes burning with fury. "You have no right to do this," she said, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. "I did nothing wrong except ask why you pulled me over." Davis smirked and stepped closer, his face just inches from hers. "Who do you think you are? Military?" he mocked, his breath reeking of cheap coffee. "Let me tell you how the law works around here. You disobeyed me, and that's enough to put you in a cell." "Got it, Lieutenant Commander?" Sarah clenched her teeth so hard her jaw ached. But she didn't respond. She knew arguing with someone like Davis would only make things worse. Instead, she remained silent, her sharp gaze locked onto him. Memorizing every arrogant detail of his face, she would remember this moment. The booking process began, the female officer at the desk, though visibly uneasy with Davis's behavior, followed orders. She took Sarah's mugshot, one front-facing, one profile, the harsh camera flash making Sarah wince. Then came the fingerprint scan, her hands pressed firmly against the cold glass surface. With every step, Sarah felt her dignity being stripped away. She was being treated like a criminal. For what? For questioning an officer abusing his power? When the prints were done, Davis grabbed her arm and yanked her down the dimly lit hallway toward the holding cells. "Let's go, Lieutenant Commander," he sneered, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You'll be spending the night here." The heavy metal door screeched as it opened. The cell was small, reeking of mildew, its stained concrete walls closing in. A rusted metal cot sat in the corner. Barely resembling a bed, Davis shoved her inside and yanked off the cuffs with a rough jerk, leaving red marks on her wrists. "Get comfortable," he taunted, standing in the doorway with a smug grin. "Tomorrow, I'll decide if you get to walk out of here. Consider this a lesson in attitude adjustment." The door slammed shut behind him, the sound of the lock clicking into place landing like a hammer blow to Sarah's pride. She stood alone in the cold jail cell, rubbing her sore wrists as her eyes scanned the dim space. Davis's footsteps faded into the distance, leaving her in heavy silence, broken only by the steady patter of rain outside. Sarah sat on the edge of the cot, a wave of humiliation rising within her like a tide. She was a Navy lieutenant commander with over 15 years of service. A woman who had commanded warships on dangerous missions, and now she was locked in a filthy steel cage because a cop wanted to flex his power. She thought of her mother, her younger brother Daniel, and her little niece Lily, her family waiting for her at home. Unaware of what she was enduring, but beneath the humiliation, something else began to burn. Sarah recalled the moments that defined her, the day she earned her first medal, the day she stood on the deck of her ship, looking at her crew with pride, the years she spent proving her worth as a black woman in the military, defying every doubt and expectation. "I won't let him win so easily," she told herself, the words in her mind carrying the weight of a vow. She didn't know how she would get out of this, but one thing was certain: Michael Davis had picked the wrong person to bully. Her hands clenched into fists, and despite the exhaustion in her body, her eyes burned with determination. She would fight for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated the way she had tonight. Down the hall, Davis's mocking laughter echoed, but Sarah no longer heard it. A plan was already forming in her mind, and she knew this fight was just beginning. The cold jail cell in the Birmingham County Police Station was swallowed in darkness, with only a dim fluorescent light from the hallway casting faint shadows through the metal bars. Sarah Johnson sat on the edge of a rusted steel cot, gently rubbing her wrists, still red from the tight grip of the handcuffs Michael Davis had locked on her. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, the occasional drops tapping against the concrete outside. The air was thick with silence, but inside her, a fire still burned, anger and determination intertwining. She refused to break under this injustice, not after 15 years of facing storms in the Navy. Not after everything she had overcome to become a lieutenant commander. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "He will pay for this." Footsteps echoed down the hall, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. She opened her eyes, sharp and focused, locking onto the cell door. A figure appeared, not Davis, but a young officer, likely in his early 20s, his posture tense and uncertain. He wore the standard police uniform, but unlike Davis, he lacked arrogance. Instead, his eyes held hesitation, even concern. He stopped in front of the cell, gripping a phone tightly in his hand, and looked at Sarah through the bars. "Lieutenant Commander Johnson?" he asked, his voice low and slightly unsteady, as if unsure of what to say next. Sarah rose to her feet, stepping closer to the bars, her gaze steady. "That's me," she replied, her tone calm but carrying an undeniable strength. "What's going on?" The young officer glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "I just got a call from high up. Very high up. They're asking about you. They want to know why you're locked up." Sarah's brow furrowed, but a flicker of understanding crossed her mind. She wasn't surprised. Throughout her career, she had built strong connections, from commanding officers in the Navy to allies in government agencies. But she hadn't expected them to step in this quickly. Before Sarah could respond, the heavy sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, and Michael Davis appeared at the far end. His face was flushed with anger, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the young officer standing outside the cell. "What the hell are you doing here, Phillips?" Davis growled, his voice laced with threat. The young officer, Phillips, flinched but held his ground, his voice steady despite the tension. "Sir, I just got a call from the sheriff's office. They want to talk about this woman, Lieutenant Commander Johnson. They told me to inform you immediately." Davis scowled, his gaze flicking from Phillips to Sarah, then back again. "What call? Who called?" he barked. But there was something different in his tone now, something uncertain. A crack in his arrogant confidence. Sarah remained motionless, watching Davis through the bars, her expression unwavering. Phillips swallowed hard and replied, "I don't know the details, sir, but they said it came from high up, very high up. They're demanding an explanation for Lieutenant Commander Johnson's arrest." Davis stiffened, his fists clenching at his sides. The usual smugness on his face had been replaced by something else, unease. He turned sharply toward Sarah, stepping closer to the bars, and snapped, "What did you do? Who did you call? You think you can worm your way out of this by pulling strings?" Sarah smirked, a cold, confident smile, the kind she had used countless times when facing down challenges aboard a warship. "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice calm and firm. "I didn't have to call anyone. I just happened to have friends in very high places, people who don't take kindly to a Navy lieutenant commander being treated like a criminal over a broken taillight." The words hit Davis like a punch to the gut. He took a step back, his face contorted with anger and uncertainty, his eyes scanning her as if searching for a weakness. But there was none. All he found was Sarah's unshakable gaze, steady as ever. Davis turned to Phillips and barked, "Are you sure? Who called? What else did they say?" Phillips shook his head, his voice unsteady. "I don't know, sir. They just told me to notify you immediately, and that someone is on their way down here to review the situation." Davis slammed his fist against the wall with a loud thud, making Phillips flinch. "Fine," he snarled, spinning back toward Sarah. "You think you've won? I'm still in charge here until they arrive." But his voice lacked the confidence it once held, and Sarah could see the beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the station's cold air. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped back, sat on the edge of the rusted cot, and kept her eyes locked on Davis. "Go ahead," she said, her voice soft but unmistakably defiant. "But you should be ready. Because when they get here, you'll have a lot to answer for, not just to me, but to everyone else you've treated like this." For a moment, Davis was silent, his expression hardening as if he had just realized he was up against an opponent he couldn't intimidate. Phillips stood frozen, glancing between Davis and Sarah, clearly unsure of what to do. Davis turned abruptly and stormed out of the hallway, muttering something under his breath, but Sarah could hear the tension in every hurried step. As his figure disappeared from sight, Phillips looked at her through the bars and whispered, I'm sorry about this." Sarah gave him a small nod, saying nothing. She didn't blame him, she knew exactly who was responsible. Alone in the cell, she took a deep breath, The humiliation she had felt earlier had now been replaced by something else: confidence. She didn't know exactly who had made the call, but she had a few guesses. It could have been Colonel Harris, her former commanding officer, a man who had always treated her like a daughter. Or maybe it was one of her colleagues at the Pentagon, someone she had worked with on special operations. Whoever it was, she knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't let this slide. Davis might think he was the law around here, but the real law was coming, and it wouldn't be on his side. The rain outside had completely stopped, but inside Sarah, another storm was brewing, ready to erupt. She allowed herself a small smile, waiting for the moment when justice would come knocking. Courtroom number 5 of the Jefferson County Courthouse was thick with tension. Heavy like the air before a thunderstorm, every seat in the gallery was filled, journalists with notepads and recording devices. Curious locals drawn by the case that had shaken Birmingham. A low murmur rippled through the room, eyes fixated on the center, where Sarah Johnson stood tall, her head held high despite the nerves churning inside her. 2 days had passed since Michael Davis had wrongfully arrested her on the highway. She had been released after a direct intervention from Colonel James Harris, her former commanding officer in the Navy, who had placed a call to the sheriff's office. But today, she wasn't just here to prove her innocence, she was here to face Davis and the system that had allowed him to abuse his power. Sarah wore a simple yet sharp black suit, her dark brown hair neatly pulled back, her eyes reflecting the unwavering determination she had honed over 15 years in the Navy. Beside her stood her attorney, Robert Ellis, a seasoned former prosecutor known for his relentless pursuit of justice in cases involving police misconduct. Across from them, at the defendant's table, sat Michael Davis. Gone was the arrogance from that night. He wore a freshly pressed police uniform, but his averted gaze and clenched fists on the table betrayed his unease. The courtroom murmured as people took in the sight of him. The man who once declared himself the law now looked like someone awaiting a verdict that could decide the fate of his entire career. On the judge's bench, Judge Margaret Coleman, a woman in her 50s with a stern face and steel-rimmed glasses, banged her gavel to call for silence. "Let's begin," she announced, her voice deep and firm. "Today, we are reviewing the case involving Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson and Officer Michael Davis. Prosecutor, you may proceed." A tall, lean man, Prosecutor David Harper, rose from the left side table, dressed in a gray suit. His sharp gaze swept across the courtroom before he began. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson was unlawfully detained by Officer Michael Davis on the night of March 15, 2025, on a highway near Birmingham. We will prove that his actions were not only unjustified but also a severe abuse of power." Reflecting his history of disproportionately arresting black individuals, Harper stepped toward the center of the courtroom, raising a stack of documents. "First, let's talk about Lieutenant Colonel Johnson," he continued. "She is a Navy officer with over 15 years of service, having led multiple rescue operations and earned numerous medals for bravery. She has no criminal record, no history of suspicious activity. Yet, simply because of an alleged broken taillight, which we will prove was fully functional, she was arrested, handcuffed, and thrown into a holding cell like a criminal." The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads in outrage. Sarah remained still, her gaze fixed ahead, but she could feel the sympathetic eyes of the spectators on her. Harper turned to Davis, his tone sharpening. "And this is Officer Michael Davis, a man with an arrest rate for black individuals 3 times higher than his fellow officers over the past 5 years. We have evidence showing that he repeatedly used illegitimate reasons to pull people over and detain them without legal grounds." Davis lowered his head, his hands tightening on the table, but he didn't dare look up to meet Harper's piercing stare. The turning point of the trial came when Harper requested the body camera footage from Davis to be played. A large screen lit up, and the courtroom fell silent as the video began. The torrential rain on the highway was captured in crisp detail. Sarah sat in her car, her voice calm as she asked why she was being pulled over. Davis yelled, pounded on the car door, and ordered her out with an overbearing attitude. When she questioned him again, he barked, "Because I said so?" The footage then showed him forcefully handcuffing her, pushing her into the patrol car with a smug smirk. The crowd gasped. One woman cried out, "Who does he think he is?" A juror, an older man with a weathered face, shook his head in clear disapproval. Sarah watched the video, her heart pounding as the memory resurfaced, the humiliation, the pain in her wrists, the brief moment of helplessness. But now, she felt a sense of relief as the truth was laid bare. Harper turned back to the bench, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, this footage provides undeniable proof of Michael Davis's abuse of power. He had no lawful reason to arrest Lieutenant Colonel Johnson. There was no resistance, no threat. This was an unlawful arrest, and we formally request that all charges against her be dismissed and that an internal investigation into Davis be launched." Judge Coleman banged her gavel, calling for order as murmurs erupted in the courtroom. Adjusting her glasses, she fixed Davis with a stern gaze. "Officer Davis," she said coldly, "your actions in this footage are unacceptable. I see no sign of the obstruction of justice charge you claimed against Lieutenant Colonel Johnson. Instead, I see a police officer blatantly abusing his authority." Davis looked up, his face pale, but all he could manage was a stammered, "Your Honor, I was just doing my job." Judge Coleman struck her gavel once more, her voice ringing through the courtroom like a final verdict, based on the evidence presented. "I hereby dismiss all charges against Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson. Furthermore, I order the Sheriff's Office to launch an internal investigation into Michael Davis for misconduct and his history of arrests." This court is adjourned. The gavel echoed, and the courtroom erupted in applause. Sarah exhaled deeply, her shoulders finally easing as she heard the ruling. Robert Ellis patted her on the shoulder, smiling. "Congratulations, Colonel. Justice has been served." She nodded, her gaze shifting to Davis, who now hung his head low, being ushered out by his attorney amidst the crowd's jeers. She didn't feel triumphant, not entirely. What she felt was a quiet satisfaction, and a firm resolve that this story wasn't over. The Birmingham sky glowed with a fiery orange hue as Sarah Johnson stepped out of the cafe. The fading sunlight a reminder that the day was coming to an end, but her fight was far from over. After the court ruling, after the downfall of Michael Davis, and after a heartfelt conversation with Colonel James Harris, Sarah understood that her story was more than just a personal victory. It was a spark, a small flame igniting hope for those who had been silenced by an unjust system, for those who never had the chance to stand up as she did. Standing on the sidewalk, she took a deep breath of the crisp post-rain air, feeling a newfound strength rising within her. The fight for justice and equality was not yet won, and she was far from finished. Sarah knew that her case was just a drop in the vast ocean of injustices that still existed. Michael Davis may have been suspended, his honor and career shattered, but how many more like him were out there, abusing their power under the guise of law enforcement? She thought about the thank you letters from strangers, the stories they shared about being mistreated by the police simply because of their skin color or circumstances. She thought about the promise she made to Colonel Harris, that she would keep speaking up. Not just for herself, but for everyone who needed a voice. Sarah Johnson, a Navy lieutenant colonel, was not just a soldier on the battlefield, she was a warrior for justice. And she would carry that fire even further. As she walked home, she had already made up her mind to accept the Navy Command's invitation to become a speaker, to share her story and inspire others. But she also knew that words alone were not enough. She would work with civil rights organizations, support victims of abuse of power, and push for real changes in the legal system. Only together can we change the world, she reminded herself, echoing Harris' words, a reminder that true strength did not lie in one person, but in all those willing to stand up. And now, this story was no longer just Sarah's, it belonged to all of us. The fight against injustice is never easy, but it begins with small steps, one voice, one action, one refusal to stay silent. Sarah took that step, and now it's time for us to follow. Speak up, Demand change, and never stay silent in the face of injustice. We want to hear from you, those who have followed this journey. What do you think about Sarah's story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Only together can we turn justice from a dream into reality. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories to come. See you next time.